I want to go through and show you exactly what we've covered. As far as the tools are concerned, we talked about the move tool. We talked about all of the selection tools. We talked about cropping. We didn't talk about the eyedropper because the way that people would use this are basically it happens automatically when you click on the colors down here. We talked about the healing brush. We talked about the normal brush. We talked about the clone stamp tool. We didn't talk about the history brush because, quite frankly, it's a confusing tool that I never use because there are better ways to go about it. We use the eraser. We use the paint bucket. It might be worth exploring how gradients work on your own. I don't use them enough to care about them. We didn't talk about the blur tool and the dodge and burn tool. Although if you're doing a lot with photo retouching, these are certainly things to look into. We did not talk about the pen tool. We did not get into anything that involved vectors because I do feel that's something that you should use with Illustrator. It is an interesting topic, but if you're just getting your feet wet in Photoshop, it's not a good thing to start using immediately. We talked about adding text. We talked about all of these are kind of vector tools down here. And actually Google the vector tool exercise if you want to see a really great lesson talking about the vectors. We didn't use this tool because instead we just pressed spacebar and accomplished the same thing. And I did show you the zoom tool. We talked about how to change the colors right here and the background and the foreground colors right there. This right here is just the button that we've been using the key button F for. It changes the screen button. This right here is a quick mask. We didn't do anything with masks, and that's certainly the next step in your learning, understanding what a mask is and how to use them to get the very best selection. But we did cover the majority of the tools. Over here, we talked about the layers palette. And not only did we talk about the layers palette, we talked about deleting layers, creating new layers, duplicating layers, creating layer groups, creating color adjustment layers, linking layers. We didn't talk about adding effects, and we didn't talk about adding masks, which is what this is right here. Again, that's a more advanced topic that if you're first stepping into Photoshop, probably isn't a good thing to get into. As far as all of these drop downs are concerned, it would seem as if we didn't touch on any of them. But didn't we? We got into File New, Open. We didn't talk about Bridge, but Bridge is just another way to explore things. I'm not going to go into Open Recent. You can figure that out. Closing a file, closing all, saving as, save for web. I never use Place. I just click and drag something in. Don't use Place. It's a convoluted way to do things. We didn't get into video, and we did not get into 3D because, again, those are more advanced topics. And also, we didn't talk about exporting to PDFs. Printing, Control P, it opens up a print dialog box. And while we're not talking about it, I'm sure you've used print dialog boxes in the past. As far as edit is concerned, all of the things that are important here, like cut and copy and paste, I showed you. Image, this is actually a different way to approach color correction, and it's not as good. Just quite frankly, it's not as good. We did talk about image size and canvas size, and those are also very important. I believe I showed you image rotation. Very simply, if you want to rotate an image, this is the way to do it. If you want to duplicate your image, you can do it here. And we're not going to deal with variables and analysis. That's no thank you. The image modes are actually pretty important if you're getting into professional printing. Otherwise, I wouldn't worry about it. And it's a boring, more advanced topic that I wouldn't worry about. Okay. Layers, everything that's important in these layer panels, we did just by right clicking, shift selecting, and all of that. Okay, so we're going to ignore this. Type, there's other things you can do with type. If you want to extrude it to 3D, you can do that inside of type, but we're not going to get into 3D right there. Selection, again, everything that's in the selection drop down with the exception of color range, which I did show you, you can get by making a selection and right clicking. And that's where I showed you those options right there. Filters, there's a good reason why I didn't show you the filters. Most of them are awful. The two filters that I'll use a lot are blur, Gaussian blur, which I did show you, and that just allows you to blur an image. And, maybe I'll use another one, but not all that often. I did show you noise, dust, and scratches. I don't use it that often. Honestly, I don't use many of these things. What I will tell you, though, is do go ahead and play around with some of these things up here. They're kind of fun. I don't find them immediately useful, but listen, it's a lot of fun to go into Liquify and say, oh, hey, I can do all these sorts of things. So I didn't show you those, but please do play around with these different things on your own. Click on them. They're fun. And, feel free to go into the filter gallery to see what all the different filters do. 3D, we're not touching on. View, listen, I showed you how to zoom in, zoom out, fit to screen. That's what's important. There's other options here like rulers and snap and guides. If I drag here, I can add a guide, but we won't get into that. And the windows is just a way to expand. If something isn't in the options bar, it will be in one of the windows. And I actually showed you a bunch of the windows. What windows have we seen? We've seen the properties window. The properties window. We've seen the history window. We've seen the paragraph. Well, we saw the characters window. There's another one for paragraphs that allows you to do more text editing. We know about layers. We know about tools. So which windows didn't we see? All right, 3D, not getting into. Actions, it's a pretty advanced thing that allows you to repeat the same thing over and over again. I wouldn't get into that right there. Adjustments, honestly, these are just a different way to get to the button that we did right here. So you don't need to worry about it because I showed you a different way to get there. That happens a lot in Photoshop. There's 5 different ways to get to it. I've shown you the fastest ways. So there's a lot of windows here that I've shown you better ways to get to. So where should you go if you want to keep learning from here? The topics still worth learning are Photoshop masks, channels in Photoshop, and if you have something more specific, such as laying out design in Photoshop, or really messing with text in Photoshop, painting in Photoshop, those are topics that this didn't talk about. However, as far as giving you advanced photo retouching, as far as giving you all of the basic fundamentals to really get you started and working in a Photoshop on very solid grounding, I've covered what matters. You now understand layers. You understand how to do color correction. You understand how to do selections and make it so they're as good as is physically possible. And those are the 3 fundamentals. And all of the tools just kind of feed in to helping you do that. You also know how to do corrections. That was the other thing we covered. So I hope you got a lot out of this, and I'm glad you joined me. Thank you.